The elevator doors opened with a soft chime that echoed through the marble foyer like a death knell. Damian Blackwood stepped into his penthouse at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, exactly 3 days earlier than planned. The Singapore deal had collapsed in spectacular fashion, and he'd flown back across the Pacific in a rage that could melt steel. But the moment his Italian leather shoes touched the gleaming floor, something stopped him cold. Singing. Someone was singing in his house. Not the clinical, professional tones of the medical staff he employed. This was different, warm, melodic, filled with an emotion he couldn't quite name. Spanish words floated through the air like smoke, wrapping around corners and slipping under doors. Duerme, duerme. Mi amor. Sleep, sleep, my love. Damian's jaw clenched. He'd left explicit instructions. The children were to follow their therapy schedule. No deviations. No exceptions. The 20 specialists he employed, each costing more than most people earned in a year, had made it abundantly clear Elena and Marcus would never walk, never speak. The neurological damage from their rare congenital condition was irreversible. Their mother had taken one look at them in the hospital and disappeared. Damian had spent 4 years burying himself in work, paying the best medical minds in the world to manage what he couldn't face himself. He moved silently down the hallway, his instincts, the same ones that built a tech empire from nothing, screaming that something was wrong. Or perhaps, terrifyingly, something was right. The therapy room door stood slightly ajar. Through the gap, Damian saw his 4-year-old twins on their adaptive mats. Elena in pink, Marcus in blue, both paralyzed from the waist down, both locked in bodies that refused to respond, both silent since birth. But they weren't silent now. Elena was making sounds. Not words. Dr. Callahan had assured him words were impossible, but sounds. Small, breathy noises that might have been laughter. And Marcus, Damian's breath caught in his throat. Marcus was smiling. His son was smiling. The woman kneeling between them wasn't any of the usual staff. She was the new maid, Rosa something. He'd barely glanced at her file when HR sent it over 3 months ago. Dark hair pulled back in a simple bun, wearing a plain gray dress that marked her as help. Nothing special. Nothing remarkable. Except she was doing something impossible. Rosa's hands moved in gentle patterns over Marcus's legs, applying pressure, manipulating his limbs with a precision that seemed almost ritualistic. She spoke continuously in Spanish, her voice low and melodic, while simultaneously guiding Elena's hands through movements that no therapist had ever attempted. Así, mi amor. Yes, that's it. You're so strong, so brave. Asterisk. And the children responded. Their eyes, usually distant and unfocused, tracked her movements. Their small bodies, typically rigid with spasticity, seemed almost relaxed. Damian stood frozen, his mind racing through possibilities. Coincidence? Some new medication he hadn't been informed about? A temporary neurological anomaly? But then Rosa did something that sent ice water through his veins. She pulled out a small, worn notebook from her pocket and made notes, quick, efficient clinical notes that suggested she knew exactly what she was doing. This wasn't casual care. This was systematic. Planned. Who the hell was this woman? Before anyone could spot him, Damian backed away from the door. His phone was already in his hand, pulling up the security app that controlled every camera in his home. Within seconds, he had the therapy room on screen, recording everything. He would watch, he would wait, and he would discover what Rosa was hiding. Because in Damian's experience, everyone was hiding something. And secrets in his house, around his children, were dangerous. Though as he watched Elena's face light up on the small screen, a traitorous thought whispered through his mind. What if this secret is the one thing that could save them? Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels across the globe. For 23 days, Damian Blackwood became a ghost in his own home. The man who commanded boardrooms and crashed stock markets with a single tweet now spent hours hunched over his private laptop, watching grainy security footage like a man possessed. He canceled meetings, ignored calls from investors, let a merger opportunity slip through his fingers, something the old Damien would have considered grounds for self-termination. But the old Damien had never seen his son try to move his fingers. It happened on day 7. Rosa was singing again. She was always singing. Some Spanish lullaby that Damien had started hearing in his dreams. Her hands worked over Marcus's small body, applying pressure points that no medical textbook he'd frantically researched had ever documented. Then Marcus's right index finger twitched. Once, twice, deliberately. Damien had rewound the footage 17 times, zooming in until the pixels blurred, certain he'd imagined it. But no, there it was, undeniable. Voluntary movement where there should be none. He'd nearly called Dr. Callahan immediately. Nearly. But something held him back. Some instinct that whispered, wait. Watch. Learn. By day 14, Elena was tracking objects with her eyes. Not the random, unfocused gaze the neurologist documented, but purposeful tracking. Rosa would move a colorful scarf through the air, and Elena's eyes would follow it with an intensity that made Damien's chest ache. Mira. Princessa. Look. Look. Rosa's voice was soft, encouraging, filled with a hope that felt obscene in its brightness. But it was day 19 that changed everything. Damien had finally decided to investigate Rosa's background properly. Not the surface-level check his HR department had performed, but a deep dive that his private security firm specialized in. The kind of investigation that left no stone unturned. The report arrived at 3 a.m., and Damien read it with growing horror. Rosa Elena Martinez, age 37. No formal education beyond high school. No medical credentials. No therapy certifications. Her references? Fabricated. Her previous employment history? A carefully constructed lie. Even her last address was registered to an apartment that had been vacant for 8 months. She was a ghost. Fiction. A woman who had somehow infiltrated his home and gained access to his most vulnerable children. Damien's hands shook as he scrolled through the report. Every protective instinct he possessed screamed at him to call security, to have her removed immediately, to press charges for fraud and endangerment. But then he reached the final page, and his blood turned to ice. 5 years ago, Rosa had given birth to twin boys, Miguel and Santiago, both born with the same condition as Elena and Marcus, severe cerebral palsy with paralysis and selective mutism. Both had died before their 3rd birthday. The hospital records were there in black and white. Respiratory complications. Systems failure. 2 small coffins. A mother's unimaginable grief. Damien sat in his darkened office, staring at the death certificates, and something inside him cracked. This woman, this lying, uncredentialed, desperate woman had lost everything. And somehow, impossibly, she'd found her way to his children. Was it obsession? Delusion? Or did grief teach lessons that medical schools never could? He didn't have time to answer. His phone buzzed. Dr. Callahan's name flashed across the screen, and Damien's stomach dropped. Mr. Blackwood, we need to talk about your maid. I've noticed some irregularities in the children's therapy sessions. Marcus has been showing responses that aren't documented in his treatment plan. Elena's vocalizations have increased. Someone has been interfering with their care. Damien's voice came out colder than he intended. Interfering? I've done some checking. This Rosa woman has no credentials. No background in pediatric therapy. If she's been performing unauthorized treatments on your children, it's not just unethical. It's illegal. I'm professionally obligated to report this to Child Protective Services. You'll do no such thing. Silence crackled across the line. Mr. Blackwood, with all due respect, if something happens to those children because of this woman's amateur interference. I said no. Damien's mind raced. Give me 48 hours. I'll handle it. I'm sorry, but I've already made the call. CPS will be visiting tomorrow at noon. For the children's safety, you understand. The line went dead. Damien sat frozen, watching his security monitors. On screen, Rosa was putting the twins to bed, tucking blankets around their small bodies with infinite gentleness. She kissed each of their foreheads, whispering something he couldn't hear. In 12 hours, she would be gone. The children would return to their previous state. Docile, disconnected, drifting through days that blurred into meaningless existence. Unless he did something. But what? Defend a woman who'd lied about everything? Risk his children on the unproven methods of a grieving mother with no credentials? Or trust the system, the expensive, professional, utterly failing system, that had given him nothing but false hope and mounting despair? Marcus chose that moment to make a sound. Not words, but a small, happy gurgle as Rosa dimmed the lights. Damien watched his son's face, truly looked at it, and saw something he hadn't seen in 4 years. Joy. His phone buzzed again. His lawyer, his CFO, his personal assistant, all demanding his attention on the merger that would make him another $1 billion. He silenced them all and kept watching Rosa, this woman who had nothing but had somehow given his children something priceless. Tomorrow at noon, everything would change. The question was, which direction would he let it fall? The Goldman Sachs conference room overlooked Manhattan like a glass cathedral to capitalism. 47 floors below, ordinary people rushed through ordinary lives. But up here, Damien Blackwood was orchestrating a deal that would reshape the tech industry. Or he was supposed to be. Mr. Blackwood? Your thoughts on the acquisition timeline? Damien stared at the projection screen, seeing numbers that should have made his pulse race. Instead, all he could see was Rosa's face 3 hours ago, pale and terrified as Dr. Callahan had confronted her in the foyer while Damien pretended to be in this meeting. His phone buzzed. He'd silenced it 6 times already. Gentlemen, if you'll excuse me for 1 moment. It buzzed again, and again. Damien's assistant appeared in the doorway, her face ashen. She never interrupted board meetings. Never. Sir, it's about the children. The room tilted. He was in his car before his brain caught up to his body. The driver running 3 red lights while Damien's hands gripped his phone so hard the screen cracked. Tell me exactly what's happening. His head of security's voice was tense. Dr. Callahan initiated the CPS call at 11 a.m. 2 agents arrived at 11:47. I tried to delay them, but what? The children are in distress, sir. Severe distress. The moment they saw Ms. Martinez packing her belongings, they reacted. His nonverbal, paralyzed children had reacted. The penthouse was chaos. 2 CPS agents stood in the living room with clipboards and expressions of professional concern. Dr. Callahan hovered nearby, vindicated and righteous. The medical staff clustered in corners, whispering. And in the center of it all stood Rosa, tears streaming down her face, a battered suitcase at her feet. But it was the children's room where Damien's world shattered. Elena and Marcus were in their adaptive beds, and they were making sounds, raw, desperate sounds that might have been crying, might have been screaming, might have been the first real communication they'd ever attempted. Their small bodies arched and twisted against their limitations, fighting against muscles that wouldn't obey. Elena's face was red, her mouth open in what could only be described as grief. And Marcus was trying to reach toward the doorway where Rosa had disappeared, his arm trembling with effort that should have been medically impossible, his fingers stretching, grasping at empty air. Rosa. The sound was barely human, more air than voice, broken and incomplete. But it was a word. His son had spoken a word. Mr. Blackwood. One of the CPS agents, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense clipboard, approached him. We need to ask you some questions about Ms. Martinez's qualifications and her interactions with your children. Damien didn't answer. He was watching Rosa through the doorway, watching her shoulders shake with silent sobs as she heard Marcus's voice for the first time. Sir, do you understand that unlicensed individuals performing medical therapy on vulnerable minors is a serious matter? Mr. Blackwood. Dr. Callahan stepped forward, his voice oozing professional concern. I know this is difficult, but we must prioritize the children's safety over sentimental attachment. This woman has no credentials, no training, no. Get out. Everyone froze. I'm sorry. Dr. Callahan blinked. Damien turned, and the look on his face made people step back. This was the expression that had destroyed competitors and toppled CEOs. But now it was aimed at the man he'd paid $6 million over 4 years. You heard my son speak his first word, and your response is to remove the person who made it possible. You're fired. Security will escort you. Mr. Blackwood, you're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking clearly for the first time in 4 years. You and your colleagues told me my children would never improve. Never speak. Never show joy. You were wrong. He turned to the CPS agents, his voice dropping to something more controlled, more dangerous. And you're here because of a report from a man who just lost his extremely lucrative position. I suggest you consider his motivations. The female agent's eyes narrowed. Sir, regardless of Dr. Callahan's motivations, we still need to investigate. Then investigate this. Damien strode to Rosa, who looked up at him with desperate, frightened eyes. She started to speak, but he held up a hand. Not yet. He addressed the room, his voice carrying the command that moved markets. Rosa Elena Martinez lost her twin sons 5 years ago. They had the same condition as my children. She spent those years learning everything she could about their condition, not from textbooks or medical schools, but from living it, from fighting it, from watching her children struggle and searching desperately for anything that might help them. Rosa's eyes widened. He knew. He'd known. She came here under false pretenses because she knew that no one would hire a grieving mother without formal papers, that her lived experience would be dismissed as worthless compared to credentials. So she lied. She forged references. She did whatever she had to do to get access to children who might benefit from what she'd learned. Mr. Blackwood, the CPS agent tried to interrupt. And in 3 months she accomplished what 4 years of the best medical care money could buy could not. My son just spoke his first word. My daughter is making purposeful sounds. Marcus has voluntary finger movement. Elena tracks objects with intention. All things your reports and Dr. Callahan's expertise deemed impossible. He turned back to Rosa, whose face was a mask of shock and tears. So here's what's going to happen. Rosa will continue working with my children, but under the supervision of licensed therapists, ones I haven't fired, who will document her methods and learn from them. I will personally fund her education to become properly certified. And anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with my legal team, which costs more per hour than most people earn in a month. Sir, that's not how this works. That's exactly how this works. Damien pulled out his phone. I'm calling Judge Morrison right now. We went to Harvard together. Then I'm calling Commissioner Williams at CPS. My foundation has donated $8 million to child welfare programs in this city. And then I'm calling every media outlet in New York to tell them how a grieving mother who lost her own children found a way to help mine, and how the system tried to stop her. The room was dead silent. Or, Damien continued, his voice softening, you can observe the children's progress over the next 30 days under proper supervision and documentation, and make your assessment based on results rather than paperwork. The CPS agents exchanged glances. From the children's room, Marcus made another sound. Row, essay. The female agent closed her clipboard. 30 days. Full supervision. Weekly reports. And Mr. Blackwood? If we see any sign that these children are in danger, you won't. As the agents left, as Dr. Callahan was escorted out by security, as the medical staff slowly dispersed, Damien finally turned to Rosa. She was staring at him like he'd grown a second head. Why? She whispered. You could have just... Why did you defend me? Damien looked toward his children's room, where the sounds of their distress were finally quieting. Because, he said softly, you did something I couldn't do. You loved them enough to risk everything. He held out his hand. So teach me. Teach me how to be the father they deserve. Rosa's hand trembled as she took his, and for the first time in 5 years, she allowed herself to hope. The next 6 months transformed the Blackwood penthouse into something that barely resembled its former self. Gone were the stark, minimalist spaces that looked like a hospital ward designed by an architect with no soul. In their place, color. So much color it made Damien's eyes hurt when he first came home from work, before he realized he was coming home earlier and earlier, drawn by sounds he'd never thought he'd hear. Laughter. Or something close to it. Asterisk uno. Dos. Tres. Asterisk. Rosa's voice drifted from the therapy room, now officially renamed the playroom at her insistence. Yes, Marcus, see. Push against my hand. Más fuerte stronger. Damien stood in the doorway, watching his son strain against Rosa's palm with trembling arms. Beside them, Elena worked with Dr. Sarah Chun, one of the new therapists, young, brilliant, and most importantly, willing to listen. She was documenting every movement, every technique, filling notebooks that would eventually become Rosa's thesis for the certification program she'd started at Columbia. Columbia. Damien had made one phone call to the dean. That was all it took. Mr. Blackwood. Dr. Chun looked up, smiling. You're early today. Meeting ended sooner than expected. He loosened his tie, watching Marcus's fingers curl with agonizing slowness around a foam ball. 3 months ago, this would have been impossible. Now it was routine. Routine miracles. Was there such a thing? Asterisk Papa. Asterisk. The sound froze everyone in the room. Elena was staring at him, her mouth forming the word again, clearer this time. Asterisk Papa. Papa. Asterisk. It was the 4th word she'd learned. After Rosa, yes, and more. But it was the first time she'd initiated speech without prompting. Damien's vision blurred. He blinked rapidly, but the tears came anyway, and he stopped caring who saw them. He crossed the room and knelt beside his daughter's adaptive chair, taking her small hand in his. I'm here, sweetheart. Papa's here. Elena's smile was crooked. Her facial muscles still didn't respond symmetrically, but it was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. Rosa watched the interaction with satisfaction, then checked her watch. All right, Ms. Amores, time for rest period. We've worked hard today. As Dr. Chun wheeled Marcus toward the resting area, Rosa turned to Damien. Over the months, the dynamic between them had shifted. She no longer looked at him with fear or suspicion. Instead, there was something like understanding. Walk with me, Damien said quietly. They ended up on the terrace, 40 stories above the city, where the noise of traffic was just a distant hum. Damien gripped the railing, organizing thoughts that had been circling for weeks. I've been thinking about something, he began. The foundation idea. Rosa tilted her head. They'd discussed this before, his idea to create something meaningful from the children's journey. But she'd resisted, calling it premature. There are thousands of families like ours, Damien continued. Families with children the medical establishment has written off. Parents who are told, there's nothing we can do, and left to figure it out alone. Parents who might have answers like you did, but who are dismissed because they lack credentials. Damien, the Elena and Marcus Foundation. He turned to face her. Dedicated to supporting families with paralyzed and nonverbal children. But not just with money. With research into alternative therapies. With programs that train caregivers who have lived experience. With a database of techniques that work, even if they don't fit into traditional medical models. Rosa's eyes widened. That would cost. I just made $2 billion from the merger I almost walked away from. He smiled without humor. Turns out being present for your children makes you better at everything else, too. Who knew? The medical establishment will fight you. Let them. His voice hardened. I've fought and beaten tougher opponents. And this time, I'm not fighting for money or market share. I'm fighting for kids like Elena and Marcus. Kids like Miguel and Santiago. Rosa flinched at her sons' names. Damien had learned not to avoid them. Her boys deserved to be remembered, to have meaning attached to their brief, bright lives. I want you to run it, Damien said. Not just as a figurehead, as the actual director. Your certification will be complete in 18 months. By then, we'll have the foundation operational. You'll oversee the research division, train the staff, and advocate for changes in how the medical community approaches these conditions. I don't know how to run something like that. Neither did I when I started my first company. I was 22 and arrogant and had more ambition than sense. He smiled. You have something more valuable, You've been in the trenches. You know what these families need because you were one of them. Rosa turned away, gripping the terrace railing. I lost my children, Damien. What if I'm too close to this? What if I'm just trying to fix what I couldn't fix before? Then you'll be exactly like every other parent who's ever tried to make the world better for someone else's children. He moved to stand beside her. Your sons didn't die in vain, Rosa. Everything you learned while fighting for them, it's saving Elena and Marcus. And it could save so many more. The silence stretched between them, filled with the sounds of the city and the weight of lost children and found hope. Finally, Rosa spoke. Miguel loved music. Santiago loved light. He would stare at the sun through the windows for hours. Her voice cracked. I want their names somewhere in the foundation. Something permanent. The logo, Damien said immediately. 2 butterflies. For boys who learned to fly even though their wings were broken. Rosa's tears came then, silent and cleansing. They would have been 7 this year, she whispered. Old enough to play with Elena and Marcus. Old enough to be big brothers. They still are. Damien's voice was gentle. Every child the foundation helps will be their legacy. Every parent who finds hope instead of despair will be because your sons existed. From inside, they heard Marcus make a sound. Not distress, but something almost like contentment. Dr. Chun was reading to him, her voice carrying through the open door. Rosa wiped her eyes. Okay, yes, I'll do it. Good. Damien pulled out his phone. My legal team will start the paperwork tomorrow. We'll need Damien. He looked up. Thank you, Rosa said simply, for believing me when no one else would have. Damien thought about the man he'd been 6 months ago. Cold, distant, more comfortable with quarterly reports than with his own children's laughter. That man would have had Rosa arrested without a second thought. That man would have never understood that some truths don't come with credentials. I didn't believe you at first, he admitted. I investigated you, found out about Miguel and Santiago. Almost had you removed before I realized what you were actually doing. Rosa smiled sadly. I know. You're not as subtle as you think with the security cameras. He blinked. You knew I was watching? From the beginning. She laughed at his expression. Why do you think I kept such detailed notes? I knew eventually you'd need proof that my methods worked. I couldn't give you credentials, so I gave you documentation. You played me. I trusted you. There's a difference. Rosa's expression grew serious. You could have destroyed me. Instead, you chose to understand. That's not something I'll forget. They stood together on the terrace as the sun set over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Inside, Elena and Marcus were settling into their evening routine. Fed, bathed, loved. Tomorrow would bring more therapy, more tiny victories, more hard-won progress measured in millimeters and syllables. But tonight they were simply a family, broken in different ways, held together by a grief-stricken Maid with no credentials and a billionaire who'd finally learned that the most valuable things in life couldn't be bought, just earned. One painful, beautiful day at a time. The balloons were ridiculous. Damien stood in the penthouse living room, now thoroughly transformed with primary colors and soft edges, staring at what appeared to be 50 helium balloons shaped like various cartoon characters. When had his life become a place where cartoon balloons belonged? Papa, the cake is here. Elena's voice, still slightly slurred but gloriously present, called from the kitchen. His daughter was sitting in her new adaptive wheelchair, powder blue with sparkles, her choice, navigating it with increasing skill. Her legs still didn't work. Probably never would, according to the new team of specialists who were both more honest and more hopeful than their predecessors. But she could speak. She could laugh. She could exist in the world as more than a body that refused to cooperate. Let me see, sweetheart. The cake was a disaster of frosting and sprinkles, with Happy 5th Birthday Elena and Marcus written in wobbly letters across the top. Rosa stood beside it, frosting in her hair, looking immensely proud. I helped, Elena announced. I mixed the colors. You did perfectly. Damien kissed the top of her head, breathing in the scent of strawberry shampoo and childhood. The sound of wheels on hardwood announced Marcus's arrival, pushed by Dr. Chun. His son wore a birthday hat at a jaunty angle and a grin that still looked surprised to exist on his face. Asterisk pa. Pa. Cake? Asterisk, the words came slowly, requiring concentration that furrowed his small brow. But they came. Soon. Waiting for our guests. As if summoned, the elevator chimed. The new staff, carefully vetted, genuinely passionate about their work, brought in the first wave of visitors. Not the society colleagues Damien would have invited a year ago, but the families from the Foundation's pilot program. The Johnsons, whose daughter Mia had cerebral palsy. The Patels, whose son Arjun was nonverbal autistic. The Kowalskis, whose twins had been written off by 3 separate medical teams. 15 children total. All of them supposedly impossible cases. But the room filled with sounds that made impossible seem like a failure of imagination. Laughter, excited shrieks, the electronic voices of AC devices, the rolling of wheels, the shuffle of adaptive equipment. It was chaos and beautiful and nothing like the sterile silence that had once filled this space. Damien caught Rose's eye across the room. She was wearing a dress instead of her usual practical clothes, dark green, elegant, with a pin on her lapel. 2 butterflies, gold and gleaming. The foundation had been operational for 3 months. Already they'd fielded over 2,000 inquiries from desperate families. Rose's methods, now carefully documented and peer-reviewed, were being studied at 6 major universities. The medical establishment, predictably, was split between fascination and skepticism. Damien didn't care. Results spoke louder than credentials. Asterisk speech. Speech! Asterisk, someone called out. Probably David Johnson, who'd become a friend over the months of therapy sessions and shared hopes. Damien raised his hands, quieting the room. Elena wheeled herself next to him, reaching up to grip his hand. The simple gesture still stunned him. "A year ago," he began, "I thought I knew everything about success. I'd built companies, made billions, conquered markets, but I didn't know how to help my own children." He looked down at Elena, at Marcus being positioned by Dr. Chun. "Then someone came into our lives who taught me that the most profound expertise sometimes comes not from institutions, but from lived experience, from love, from refusing to accept that impossible means not worth trying." Rose's eyes were already welling with tears. She cried easier now, since Miguel and Santiago's photos had gone up in the foundation office. No longer hidden grief, but acknowledged love. Today, the Elena and Marcus Foundation is officially launching our national outreach program. Any family with a child facing paralysis or communication challenges can access our resources. Trained therapists who combine medical knowledge with alternative approaches, financial support for adaptive equipment, and most importantly, hope. Applause filled the room, but Damien wasn't finished. This foundation exists because Rosa Martinez lost her sons and decided their deaths would mean something. Because she loved 2 boys she couldn't save, and channeled that love toward children she could help. Miguel and Santiago's legacy isn't written in their death certificates. It's written in every child who benefits from what Rosa learned while fighting for them. He gestured to the wall where the foundation logo hung, 2 golden butterflies in flight. Miguel loved music. Santiago loved light. This foundation will bring both to families lost in darkness and silence. The parents in the room understood. You could see it in their faces, the exhaustion, the endless advocacy, the fighting with insurance companies and school districts and medical professionals who'd written their children off. They understood what it meant to be seen, to be believed, to be told that their children mattered. "So let's make some noise," Damien finished, "because every sound in this room, every laugh, every word, every electronic beep, is a victory. And we're going to help as many families as possible win their own victories." The cake was cut. The party descended into controlled chaos. Elena managed to smear frosting on Marcus's face, and he retaliated by making a sound that might have been, "You're silly," which caused everyone to cheer. As the sun set over Manhattan, Damien found himself on the terrace again. But this time he wasn't alone. Rosa joined him, carrying 2 glasses of wine. For you, she said. Unless billionaires don't drink from regular glasses? He snorted. Billionaires drink from whatever's available when their daughter just fed cake to a therapy dog. They clinked glasses, looking out over the city. I got the certification exam results today, Rosa said quietly. I passed. Of course you did. Highest score in the program. She laughed. The professors kept asking where I learned my techniques. I told them grief is a hell of a teacher. The best ones usually are. They stood in comfortable silence, listening to the party sounds behind them. Inside, Elena was introducing Marcus to Mia Johnson, their children's wheelchairs side by side as Elena's careful words explained her brother's favorite games. Making friends, building connections, living lives that 16 months ago had seemed impossible. Do you think we're doing the right thing? Rosa asked suddenly. The foundation, the publicity, all of it? Sometimes I worry we're giving people false hope. Damien considered this. Is it false hope if some of them succeed? But not all will. Some children won't improve no matter what we do. Some conditions are too severe too. Then we help their families anyway. He turned to face her. Not every victory looks like Elena speaking or Marcus moving his fingers. Sometimes victory is just a family feeling less alone. Sometimes it's a parent getting 1 hour of sleep because they found a technique that helps with spasticity. Sometimes it's a child who'll never speak knowing they're valued and loved anyway. Rosa's eyes shimmered. You've changed. You changed me. He smiled. Well, you and my children. Turns out being present for tiny victories teaches you more than closing billion-dollar deals. The merger went through though. It did. And I used the profits to fund 10 more foundation locations across the country. He raised his glass. To profitable businesses that serve meaningful purposes. To unlikely partnerships, Rosa countered. To children who teach us what's possible. To Miguel and Santiago, Rosa whispered, who led me here even though they couldn't stay. They touched glasses again, and in the growing darkness, the city lights began to glow like stars brought down to earth. From inside, Elena's voice rang out, Asterisk Papa Rosa, come see. Marcus is. He's trying to stand. Asterisk. They rushed back in to find their son, braced by Dr. Chan and David Johnson, his legs trembling as he fought against 4 years of paralysis. He didn't manage it, his muscles gave out after 3 seconds. But the attempt was enough, because trying was everything. Trying meant belief. Belief meant hope. And hope, Damien had learned, was the most valuable currency in the world. As the party wound down and families departed with tired, happy children and email addresses and foundation information packets. As Elena and Marcus were tucked into their beds with stories and kisses and promises of tomorrow, Damien stood in the quiet penthouse and marveled at the transformation. A year ago, this space had been a mausoleum, beautiful and cold, filled with expensive equipment and crushing silence. Now it was alive, messy and loud and full of the everyday chaos that came with children who were learning to exist in a world that had tried to tell them they couldn't. Rosa found him there, in the dimness, staring at the wall where he'd hung photographs. Not the professional portraits that had once decorated these walls, but candid shots. Marcus laughing with frosting on his nose. Elena concentrating fiercely as she maneuvered her wheelchair. Rosa and the children covered in paint from art therapy. And in the center, a picture he'd found in Rosa's belongings and had framed without asking. Miguel and Santiago, 2 small boys with their mother's eyes, frozen at age 2, smiling at something beyond the camera's view. You kept this? Rosa said softly, touching the frame. They're part of our story. They should be visible. Damien's voice was quiet. I hope that's okay. It's more than okay. She studied her son's faces, and for once, the grief in her expression was tempered with peace. You know what Elena asked me today? What? She wanted to know if she'd have more brothers and sisters someday. Rosa laughed, shaking her head. I told her that wasn't my decision to make, and she said, Asterisk, but Papa needs someone to love him like you love us. Asterisk. Damien felt heat creep up his neck. She's 5. What does she know about? She knows her father comes home early now. She knows he smiles more. She knows he watches me like... Rosa trailed off, her own cheeks coloring. Well, she notices things. The air between them shifted, charged with something that had been building for months but neither had acknowledged. There were too many complications, too many professional boundaries, too much history of employer and employee even though those lines had blurred beyond recognition. Rosa, don't. She held up a hand. Don't say anything you'll regret. I'm still your employee. Still the woman who lied to get into your house. Still, the woman who saved my children, who taught me how to be a father, who turned my sterile penthouse into a home. He stepped closer. Who honors her dead sons by loving my living ones. Who fights for kids everyone else has given up on. Who cries at their victories and refuses to accept defeat. Damien, this is complicated. Everything worth having is complicated. He smiled, helpless and terrified and hopeful all at once. I'm not asking for anything tonight, or tomorrow, or even next month. I'm just saying, when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'd like to try, to see if this, he gestured between them, is as real as it feels. Rosa's breath caught. What about the foundation? The professional boundaries? People will say I manipulated you, that I seduced a grieving father. Let them say whatever they want. I've spent my life caring about other people's opinions. It's exhausting. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Miguel and Santiago deserved more time, but their time mattered. I brought you here. It saved Elena and Marcus. And maybe it brought us to each other. Tears spilled down Rosa's cheeks. I'm still scared. Every day. Scared they'll regress. Scared I'll lose them like I lost my boys. Scared I'll wake up and this will all be a dream. Then be scared with me. I'm terrified every single day that I'll fail them again. That I'll get too caught up in work, too distant, too much like the man I used to be. He smiled sadly. But I'm less scared when you're here. When I watch you with them and remember that love, real, fierce, unrelenting love, is stronger than fear. From down the hall, Marcus made a sound in his sleep. Not distress, just the unconscious murmur of a child deep in dreams. Rosa and Damien both turned toward it automatically, their bodies attuned to every sound the children made. When they looked back at each other, they were both smiling. I'm not ready yet, Rosa said finally. For whatever this is, there's too much to process, too much healing still to do. I know, but ask me again, in 6 months, when the Foundation's first annual report is published and I'm officially certified and the kids have hit their 1-year progress milestones. She reached out, touching his hand briefly. Ask me then. It's a date. His fingers closed around hers for just a moment. December 18th. Mark your calendar. You're ridiculous. I'm a billionaire. We're supposed to be eccentric. He grinned. Besides, if I can wait 4 years for my son to say my name, I can wait 6 months for you. They stood together in the quiet penthouse, hands linked, watching the city lights paint patterns across the walls. Behind them, the photos hung like talismans. 2 boys who had died too soon, 2 children who were learning to live fully, and a woman who had bridged the gap between loss and hope. Thank you, Damien said finally, for everything, for being brave enough to lie your way into our lives, for seeing something in my children that no one else could see, for teaching me that the best investments aren't measured in quarterly returns. Thank you for listening, Rosa replied, for trusting me when you had every reason not to, for giving Miguel and Santiago's legacy a place in the world, for being the kind of father your children deserve. I'm still learning. We all are. She squeezed his hand once more, then let go. Get some sleep. Tomorrow Elena wants to practice her speech therapy at the park, and Marcus has that meeting with the adaptive sports program. Adaptive sports. My son might play sports. The wonder in his voice was naked and unashamed. A year ago, I would have thought that was impossible. Nothing's impossible, Rosa said, heading toward her quarters. No longer the maid's room, but a proper suite Damien had insisted on. It's just harder than we want it to be. More complicated. More painful. More. Worth it, Damien finished. She smiled at him from the doorway. Yeah. Worth it. After she disappeared, Damien stood alone in the living room of his transformed life. He pulled out his phone and opened his calendar, scrolling forward 6 months. December 18th, 2026. He typed, "Ask Rosa." Then, because he was still a businessman at heart, he added, *dinner reservations. Somewhere with good wine and terrible music that makes her laugh. Tell Elena and Marcus so they can give their blessing. By ring? Maybe too soon. Research later. *. He stopped, deleted the last part, then retyped it. A man could plan ahead. His phone buzzed. A message from David Johnson. *. Thanks for today. Mia hasn't stopped talking about Elena. Well, talking via her AAC device, but still. You're doing something special with the foundation. Don't stop. *. Damien looked around the room, at the balloons wilting in the corners, the cake crumbs on the expensive carpet, the fingerprints on every surface, the beautiful, messy, impossible evidence that love could transform anything. Even billionaires, even paralyzed children, even women carrying the weight of dead sons and living hope. He walked to the children's room and eased the door open. Elena slept curled on her side, one hand dangling off the adaptive bed. Marcus lay on his back, mouth slightly open, his new stuffed elephant clutched tight. "You did good today," Damien whispered to them. "You're both so brave, so strong. Papa loves you so much." Elena stirred, murmuring something that might have been *love, Papa, before settling back into sleep. Damien closed the door gently and headed to his own room, exhausted and exhilarated in equal measure. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, it always did. There would be setbacks and frustrations and moments when progress seemed impossible. The foundation would face criticism. The medical establishment would push back. Some families would come to them too late with needs too severe to be addressed. But tonight, 2 5-year-olds who weren't supposed to speak had sung happy birthday to each other. A woman who'd lost everything had found purpose again. And a man who'd thought money could solve anything had learned that some problems could only be healed by showing up, staying present, and loving fiercely even when, especially when, the outcome was uncertain. As Damien drifted off to sleep, his last thought was of Miguel and Santiago, 2 boys he'd never met, but whose absence had somehow led to his children's salvation. "Thank you," he thought. Thank you for your mother. Thank you for your legacy. Thank you for teaching us all what's possible when love refuses to give up. And somewhere in the universe where lost children become stars, 2 small boys smiled and watched over the family their mother had built from grief and hope and unrelenting, unreasonable love. Here's what I want you to understand from this story. Credentials don't always equal competence. And love, fierce, informed, relentless love, can achieve what money and expertise sometimes cannot. Rosa had no degree, no certifications, no formal training. What she had was lived experience, grief transformed into knowledge, and a mother's determination to honor her lost sons by helping other children. The medical establishment dismissed her because she lacked papers. But she had something more valuable. She had been in the trenches. Damien had every credential that mattered in the business world. Every resource money could buy. Every expert at his disposal. But until he learned to be present, to listen, to trust someone who approached the problem from a place of love rather than protocol, his children languished. The lesson is this: never underestimate the wisdom that comes from surviving what you're fighting against. Never dismiss someone's knowledge just because it doesn't come with a diploma. And never, ever give up on someone just because the experts say improvement is impossible. Sometimes the people who can help us most are the ones we'd never think to hire. Sometimes the solutions we need come from unexpected places. From grieving mothers who've turned their pain into purpose. From children who teach us what determination really means. From fathers who learn that being present is worth more than being powerful. If this story moved you, I need you to do 3 things. First, hit that subscribe button. There are thousands of stories like this, stories about unlikely heroes, transformation, and the power of refusing to accept defeat. Don't miss them. Second, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and share a time when someone unexpected changed your life. When someone without credentials or status or resources taught you something invaluable. When love or lived experience proved more powerful than expertise. I read every single comment, and your stories matter. Third, and this is the most important, if you know someone fighting for a child with disabilities, someone told their situation is hopeless, someone dismissed by the medical establishment, share this story with them. Not because it promises miracles, but because it promises something more valuable. Hope. The reminder that they're not alone. That their fight matters. That sometimes the greatest experts are the parents who refuse to give up. The Elena and Marcus Foundation in this story is fictional, but the need it represents is devastatingly real. There are real organizations doing this work, supporting families, funding alternative therapies, treating children as whole human beings rather than medical cases. Find them, support them, or become one of the people who makes a difference, credentials be damned. Because here's the truth this story teaches us. The world will tell you what's impossible. But sometimes, just sometimes, if you love someone enough to try anyway, you discover that impossible just means no one's found the right way yet. Now drop that comment, hit subscribe, and share this video with someone who needs to hear that their impossible situation might just be waiting for an unexpected hero to come along. Your story isn't over. Their story isn't over. And sometimes, the best part hasn't even started yet. Asterisk, what's your impossible situation? What victory have you fought for that the world said couldn't happen? Tell me in the comments below.